What if I told you that your inner critic doesn't have to be your enemy? What if instead you can learn to transform that voice into a source of wisdom and strength and understanding? Today, what we're doing is we're diving straight into that relentless voice inside your head. That one that judges, the one that doubts, the one that criticizes every single move you make. We've all heard it, and most of us have struggled with it. But what if I told you that your inner critic doesn't have to be your enemy? What if instead you can learn to transform that voice into a source of wisdom and strength and understanding? So, we're going to break down how to quiet the noise, move through your emotions, and actually make that inner voice work for you rather than against you. So, let's get to it. So, where or what is the inner critic? Right, let's start with that. Where does it come from? But let's start with what is it? What is that voice inside of our head? I always like to laugh at this because when I think about this, I think about how much inner dialogue we have that is just like almost arguing or competing with itself. Like I have a certain thought and then something else pops up and tells me, oh no, that's not right. Or, oh, don't do that. Or, oh, everyone's going to laugh or you're going to look stupid. So we have this civil war going on inside of our brain of like, this is right and this isn't. And it's like, why can't we be on the same team? Why can't we be on the same team? Well, where this comes from is a lot of rooted into our conditioning and our fear, but it's a lot of survival. And so these things aren't just here and they're non-supportive. We just live in a very safe environment now. And we're not being chased by things anymore. We're not walking through the jungle and something's just jumping out to eat us. Right? We're not constantly in fear of where our food is coming from. Most of us live a life where we are safe and secure for the most part. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying there's not fears. But I'm saying we live in a world where you can order something in the morning and it gets delivered on your front door in the afternoon. You order food and it gets delivered. We're not living in this environment where these reactions were created. And so we're going to go through a different way here because you're probably like, Kayla, why are we talking about our evolutionary state of how our brain was formed? Because it's really important to know that this isn't something to judge. That inner critic that we have is not something we need to judge or even push aside. It's just something we need to get on our team. Somewhere along the way, we started to judge it and push it off of our team and act like it shouldn't be there. What we need to do is learn to communicate with it. We need to change that dialogue. And so instead of us being very resistant and just in constant conflict, we are using that dialogue that comes up in our brain as a way to, one, keep us safe still, right? Even though there's still perceived fears and there's actual things we need to protect ourselves from. And so how do we use it in a way to do that? And how do we stop using it in a way that completely derails us, a way that completely minimizes us, in like a way that completely disrupts our way of being, right? So how that inner critic shows up in life is it comes out of nowhere. We are just sitting there thinking, having a good time. And this could be just random thoughts that you have that you've suppressed. And then it rises to the surface. But I want you to remember one thing, that most intense emotions only last 90 seconds unless you feed them with stories. So this is a way for you to really remind yourself that you can outlast that initial wave. Right? You can outlast that initial wave of the emotion. Because what happens is we feel this emotion, we're sitting there, we have a thought, boom, we have an emotion that arises, and then we keep feeding that thought the story. And now that thought and that emotion has legs and it can run. And it starts running really fast sometimes. And then we start to spiral. And so that's a really big, important place for you to recognize and notice is that if you can outlast that initial wave of about 90 seconds, a minute and a half, then you can start to see yourself a little more clearly. So that's something before we even get into separating from it, that's something that you can tangibly do is just remind yourself, I'm safe and calm. This feeling will pass and just breathe, right? That's a simple technique that you can use, but that's not a cure all. right? That is not something that's just going to fix it every single time, right? So we have to begin to recognize how we can separate from the voice. How can we use that 90 seconds to separate from that voice? That you are not your thoughts. Have you ever heard that phrase before? You are not your thoughts. I'm not my body. I'm not my thoughts. What that means is that thoughts are just things that are created and can just move through us. We identify with those thoughts and then we become that identity, but we are not our thoughts. And so, what does that look like? Right? You can imagine this inner critic within you as something that is just there to help guide you. It's something that's really showing you a way. It's something that's really giving you insight into a way that you can protect yourself. Now, when we look at it that way, you're like, well, I don't actually understand, because that just seems like I'm just going to keep doing the same things that I am wanting to stop. But you have to understand that you're turning your critic into an ally. And so you're looking at it from, this is a protective nature of your inner voice. This is the thing that helps you navigate the world that can be dangerous. But you have to also recognize that a lot of things we think are dangerous are actually not. So how do we change our relationship with that? How do we reframe those negative thoughts into constructive insights? Well, a very simple one, and I go to this one all the time because I think it's one of the biggest fears that people have, and it's one of the biggest places they hold themselves back, and it's with using their voice. And so whether that's using your voice, whether in a relationship, using your voice in on social media, using your voice to actually get on stage and speak, any of these things, right? So we think that we have to protect ourselves from speaking up, from our truth, but we've attached all of these stories to it about why it's not safe to speak up, or what people are going to think, and how we might make them mad, or how they might judge us. And we've created ourselves into this thought spiral that now feels unsafe to speak or to even exist as us. And so, of course, why would you speak up now? You've just created the environment that it's unsafe, that you can't do that, that everyone's going to judge you, and you're going to be completely exiled from society, and all of these big, grand things that our brain likes to think, because it needs something to do. That's what the brain's job is, right? The brain is there to solve problems. So it's going to continually find areas to solve, and it's going to create challenges to solve them, right? So when we're turning that critic into our ally, we're getting it on our team. What we're doing is we're starting to get a little bit of that separation. We're starting to say, okay, this feeling is arising within me. I feel upset. I feel judged. I feel even happy, right? I feel these things within me. And what is that trying to show me? What is that fear of being judged trying to show me? So you're turning this into you're turning into curiosity, right? You're turning your judgment into curiosity. You're starting to explore, you're starting to go deeper, you're starting to change your relationship and your dynamic with these thoughts, with that inner critic. So it's no longer criticizing you and you're saying, oh my gosh, of course, I can never think highly of myself. I can never be capable. I can never do this. I can never do that. You're starting to turn that into a way where you start to question it. You start to look at it with curiosity, and you start to say, why are you telling me that this is safer? Is it actually safer? Is there actually a real threat? If I speak up, if I do this, is there an actual threat to my real safety? Or is it something that I need to practice moving through? Is it something that I can say, thank you, inner critic, for showing me something that I couldn't see before, but I can see that if I'm aligned in my actions, then I feel really good about what I speak. Because sometimes that's there to say, like, don't do that. You don't really even truly believe that, or you're jumping on a bandwagon and you're sharing it. And it's not something that you really, really, really even care about or really think. And so those are some different ways where we can actually pull back and say, what am I trying to do? Or am I just is my ego trying to put this out there so I can feel better than somebody else? So I can make somebody else feel wrong. And that's oftentimes where we come back and say, I wish I wouldn't have done that, right? I wish I wouldn't have said that. I wish I wouldn't have, talked to them that way, because it was just coming from an unhealed place, a place of the ego trying to create the superiority over somebody else. So we just begin to, as always, question. Ask why it's there, what it means, and what it could look like if it was different. And how do we stop judging it, right? So you can't judge this voice inside your head, or you're just feeding it. It's just getting more restrictive. And now all you're doing is focusing on how you wish it wasn't there, instead of just recognizing that it is there. And you don't have to latch onto it. You don't have to jump on that story thought train and create it to this like huge momentum. You can just say, okay, that's present, right? That's present. That's there for me. And you can also use that as a way to move through your emotions. We're always talking about how we can shift our emotional state. So this is another way that you can take those really intense triggers and you can start to use them as a way to look at what needs to be seen, to go deeper. You can use them as grounding areas and starting points to say, what needs to be seen here? Right? How can I get through this emotion? How do I not attach any story to this emotion? And how do I do so without spiraling? What are some grounding exercises? What are some ways I can breathe deep here? And how can I have some self compassion for myself? How can I speak up to myself like I was a friend? How would I tell myself to chill out? Right. So when we have this dialogue that's in our brain and it's going back and forth, we have to use it in a way that it's either being really supportive for us or it's really pulling us away. It's not something that is distracting us from going deeper or pushing us from going to those deeper levels. It's actually something that we're starting to come to closer terms with, and we're starting to allow ourselves to be more comfortable with, because there's nothing wrong with this voice inside of our head that tells us that we need to do something differently. And instead of judging that or thinking, oh, I wish you weren't there, we can start to poke holes in it and we can say, but what is it about this that I need to do differently? How can I believe in myself to be able to execute what it's asking me to do differently? How do I not fall into fear and shame and guilt and blame and all of those other things that I'm trying to avoid, and actually use this voice as a way to go deeper into myself? And so it's there for a reason. It's there to help keep us safe. So we have to be able to discern what is actually protecting us and where it's not. So I think this is a really big space where a lot of people don't know how it keeps us safe, or what the value is in it, or how we can have gratitude towards that and what that could look like. So what are you trying to protect me from? Or really doing a curiosity flip here. How can I use this insight constructively? So instead of breaking yourself down, how can you compassionately rewrite that? What would that look like? As always, where is this coming from? Why do I think this? Why is this something that keeps coming up for me in this thought? And how is it something that I can identify as a a way that's been a disruptor? So I want you to spend some time really writing down the common phrases or those thoughts that your inner critic says, and then just begin to see if there's any recurring themes, and just look at those patterns that show up. And are there any that really help you understand where that voice started from? Is it something that you can see that's rooted back in childhood? Is it something that you can see actually came from, a critical teacher, a parent, right? Societal pressures, like really understanding their roots can really help depersonalize it and help you create some separation from it. And those are really big aspects when you are allowing yourself to move through it. Right. And again, always remember that 90-second rule, that those intense emotions only last for 90 seconds. So unless you're feeding them stories, you can outlast that wave. I know you can. And just check in with yourself. What does this mean for me? Where did this come from? What is this environment like? And how can I change my relationship with it? How can I not jump on this thought train? How can this thought be present without me judging it? Like, it's okay if you don't think you're capable, but in that same breath, start to remind yourself why you are capable. How can you do this? How can you use this experience and what you've learned as a way to push you forward, as a way to move forward, as a way to experience yourself differently? So it comes to a lot of honesty with yourself of shifting these thoughts. Right. And so this voice in our head is not something that we need to get rid of. It's something that we need to learn to work with. It needs to be a dialogue that's supportive for us. It needs to be something that we understand when it's no longer supportive for us, when it's pulling us away from more of a supportive nature. And it's just simple, right? And again, it's that conditioned response that we spend so much time trying not to have it present, that we can't allow it to just be. right? So just allow it to be. Don't judge it. Just let it be there and start to play around with what it's trying to show you. What do you need to learn from that voice? What can it do for you? How could your inner critic be your friend? How can it be that space that helps you see things that maybe you couldn't see before? But you're not jumping on the thought train to completely derail and destruct yourself, right? We've gone through a lot. Go back and listen to some other podcast episodes here that will help you and support you in understanding how we can separate from this and why it's so important as well. And I have a resource that I think would be really helpful for you. And I'll drop it in the comments here that can help break through a lot of conditioning, help us break through this inner voice and understand it to a much deeper depth. So you don't attach to it as much, and you start to loosen your judgment on it, and you start to see the different ways where you can use it to support you versus a way to pull you away from success. So there you have it. That voice inside your head absolutely does not have to be a source of endless torment. And by separating from it and learning to reframe its message, and by learning to get it on your team as a supportive ally, you can really transform that inner critic. So remember that there's a lot of self compassion, there's a lot of patience, there's a lot of different aspects that go into this that you need to be practicing for yourself. And if you enjoyed today's episode, just be sure to subscribe and share and join and share with me #emotional revolution. And until next time, keep transforming from within.